have Sikha Kambose, who is a partner with KPMG India in DT Cybersecurity Practice, Strategy and Governance. So I'd like to welcome Sikha on you to stage. Thank you.
Data loss for digital economy. I'll be moderating this panel. My name is Shikha Kamboj. I'm a partner with KPMG and I head the data privacy and ethics solution for KPMG. I've been in this field for 18 plus years now. And today I'm really excited to welcome the panelists here on the stage. So we have Shri Anil Bharadwaj, DDG SE, Department of Telecommunications with us. And also Shweta Singh, Head Policy and Strategy Regulatory Bharti Airtel Limited. Amit Mathur, Head Data Regulation and Data Architecture Reliance Jio. And also Arun Sharma, Senior Digital Development Specialist at World Bank. Great. So when we talk about data laws, of course, you know how telecom and technology have fundamentally shifted the way, we used to communicate and live our daily lives. It has been influencing our behavior as well to a large extent and kind of diminishing the physical boundaries and getting people connected more in the digital ecosystem, right? So with this era of rapid digital transformation, also the protection of personal data has emerged as a key concern area. And nations are now grappling with the complexities of data privacy laws as well as the complexities of intricacies that are coming in from the interconnected global landscape as well. And then India, with its growing digital economy, of course, has responded by enacting legislative measures aimed at addressing data protection challenges, but still a lot more has to be done in this space. So if we look at the digital economy and how it continues to expand, data is one of the most valuable assets that we have, right? So with the increasing reliance on data-driven technologies, the need for robust data governance and regulation has also been never more critical than it is today. And with this session, the aim is to focus on exploring what are the key provisions of DPDPA, how it intersects with other existing legislation, and then also focus on key aspects such as data privacy protection and also the cross-border data flows. So with that, I'll just open up the session and I'll have my first question directed to Arun in terms of what are the key provisions of DPDPA 2023 and how do they compare to international regulations like GDPR?
The DPDP Act, Shikha, it replaces a very bulky data protection or privacy law that was in the works since 2017. And in the numerous iterations that it went through, it became unwieldy. So the government in 2022 withdrew that from the parliament and presented another law which is very short. It's 21 pages if you want to go through it. And for the first time, it talks about privacy in the digital domain. So it applies for digital artifacts and digital privacy. It doesn't apply to non-digital artifacts, and it applies to, first time, consent has been described. So a lot of the provisions are similar to the GDPR, because GDPR is said to be the gold standard, although I have my opinions. But basically the economy of the EU region hit a roadblock once the GDPR was enacted, because it had very strict provisions on data localization, data regulations, in the way large tech companies were supposed to store, maintain, share data. And those ramifications are still being felt. So India has, this law has been modeled after Australian and Singaporean laws, largely. They're more open and it's fairly, there's accountability. It's not a sweeping provision against big tech. Right. So there's rule for everybody. The rules for under the DPDP Act would probably be released by government for consultation this month. That's my intel, but obviously it may vary. and it talks about a data protection board which will lay down how these provisions are supposed to be put in place. There is hefty penalties. In the previous session we were talking about this, which is at a reasonable amount. It's not something completely crazy or out of the park, but it's still heavy enough to be a deterrent, so that the tech companies take this seriously. But a lot of work would be required in translating the rules for sector-specific data. So the entire consent architecture, which I referred earlier, which describes the data principal, the data fiduciary, the data processor, all of those roles and responsibilities in the financial sector, in the health sector, in the agri sector now with the agri stack all coming up, will have to be applied, and it will affect a lot of other laws and regulations that we have in place.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and very well pointed out. I think from a provision standpoint, there are a lot of provisions that are being talked about in DPDPA. So you have to have clear articulated basis for processing of data. So it's not only legitimate interest, but there are consent basis that you will have to now obtain consent from individuals to process their data for secondary purposes, and in some cases even to offer them marketing and promotional emails. And that's where we say that data subjects also have now new rights which they haven't seen before. And they are now, as they become aware of these rights, I'm sure they will also be reaching out to organizations to exercise those rights, to whether it's right to access, correct their data. Correct their data is not a new right, that has always been there. But now with added data deletion rights is something that organizations are now looking at. How do they operationalize this? And with that, now I have a follow-up question for Anil. Like, how can consumer privacy rights be balanced with the need for innovation in AI and also big data and IoT? And what are the implications that you see for businesses?
Thank you, Shikha. Actually, see, the data laws, when it comes to consumer privacy, the new act itself has come after the Puthuswamy judgment, and I have somebody sitting on my side who was part of my team, and she is the one who explained the implications of that judgment. So basically it is by design a consent-based system, and the principles, the data principles have been well defined. The agencies or the agents who will manage your data, that has been clearly defined. How that data has to be anonymized, that has been clearly decided. And India as such has gone for a soft approach where we are not saying hardbound laws that data has to reside in India, but what can go out, how it will keep the privacy. So if I may use the word, single word, it is privacy by design. You have to design your systems that consumer privacy is at the forefront. And then the whole data administration process has to be inbuilt. It has to be a trust forming system. It has to be an opt-in system with explicit mentioning of how and what kind of use my data is put to. So I'm sure that given the new framework, and once the future implementation agency, which is the Data Protection Board, comes, the consumer remains the mainstay, and consumer data will remain as anonymized, as visible, so that no individual gets to any negative implications of his or her data being shared.
Thank you so much for that. And when you talked about anonymization, so there are definitely now different point of views that are coming in, whether the data is truly anonymized and to what extent is the data needs to be anonymized, what standards or what techniques are being used such that it's not reverse engineered and cannot be linked back to an individual, right? So on that, I do have a specific question for Amit. In terms of how can encryption and anonymization and other technologies be used to protect this sensitive data, and what are the limitations that you've come across for some of these methods?
Thank you, Shikha. Uh, this is a very critical piece in the whole scheme of things. When you look at, yes, the data is available, and you have to ensure the privacy of the data. And there are various techniques which people have been using over the period. One, encryption has been one of the things, but then encryption has its challenges. What is the level of encryption you do? And then how do you, even if you transfer data to a third entity, how does that entity decrypt it, use it for that particular purpose only? Uh, so there have been other ways people have looked at. Anonymization is one of the ways which we talked about. This is something where we try to ensure that the individual's privacy is maintained. But then there are challenges in that. There could be things where you could maybe correlate two databases, different databases, and come out with de-anonymize the whole thing. So those are the kind of challenges which are there, and that's some of those challenges which even the group which was working on the India AI mission has identified. And that's one of the proposals which is there is to set up some standards for the anonymization so that everybody across board, this act is not just limited to say tech industry or say the telecom industry. It is something which is going to impact everybody and each individual and every industry in the country. So the anonymization standards have to be defined so that it's easier for the industry or the individuals to share their data without any harm coming to them. So that's something which a lot of debate is going on what should be the standards which we should use for anonymization. It's a work in progress, and it's something which you keep doing, and it just keeps evolving. So that's the challenge which is there, which everybody in the industry is going to face. They're facing today, and it's going to increase day by day.
Absolutely. And these are some of the things that are not new. So anonymization and some of these techniques have always existed, right? It's just that to what extent are you deploying them, whether it is just one technology or a combination of it that you are incorporating in your environment is what matters, and doing the right thing also is something that you need to look at. So with that, of course, compliance kind of is becoming a challenge these days. And so Shweta, this is a question for you. How, in your experience, companies have been managing the compliance with various data regulations across multiple jurisdictions, and what are the potential consequences of non-compliance?
Before I get to that question, can I just take a stab at the last question as well?
Sure.
So all good points that Sir had made actually. One of the things that the current Data Protection Act, the latest version or the ones that is notified, is that it actually is a very user-friendly act, and it has been written in a very simple language. Second thing is it also gives an opportunity to businesses to use the data. There is not a section which prohibits the use of personal data. Second thing is that in this version of the bill, non-personal data was carved out. Right. Non-personal data is not regulated under this bill. So any business that is using non-personal data or anonymized data or aggregated data sets is anyway outside the purview of the Data Protection Act. So it is business friendly in that sense that it is left up to the enterprises to come up with the best privacy-centric, privacy-by-design way of using the data of users and come up with use cases. However, what we are lacking is that today we don't have an encryption standard. We don't have a national encryption policy. So what is actually considered as anonymization, what is the gold standard for anonymized data that can't be de-anonymized is not codified in law. So that's something that's probably lacking on the governance part. But for businesses, I think there are a plethora of opportunities that they can explore. Now, coming on to the compliance part, so we come from a sector that's highly regulated. The telecom sector, with or without the Data Protection Act, already has a very stringent set of regulations, whether it comes to our telecom license or from the telecom regulator, the TRAI, with respect to commercial communication, with respect to marketing communication. So using the data of our customers responsibly is part of our DNA. Second part is that taking consent of our customers before reaching out to them with promotional messages or any kind of marketing messages is again codified in our telecom laws as well. So that's anyway second nature to us. What DPDPA does is firstly, it gives you horizontal platforms. It's not just restricted to telecom or tech. It is a law which is horizontal in nature. So it's applicable to all industries, to all types of data sets. So that will just bring a level of uniformity. What we would want as a stakeholder, as a responsible stakeholder, is a harmonization of laws from a compliance standpoint. We're not shying away from compliances under DPDPA or license or the TRAI regulation. The only thing probably that we have consistently put across to the government is that there should be harmonization in laws.
Right.
That's it.
Great. Following up on that point only though, and this is an open question for the panel. When we talk about, some of these rules to be embedded within the product ecosystem, so how can organizations be held responsible for also designing the product in a way that there are nudges built at the right time for customers to make sure that they are, whatever decisions they are making while using those products or services, they are making more privacy aware decisions?
Google had this motto earlier, which they've dropped now: don't be evil. So that's something to live by. The rest is up to the company. And I mean, it's difficult to quote, explain this point without quoting examples. And I don't want to quote examples because there are people from those companies here in the room. But there have been instances, if you see, where consent was not taken, it wasn't explicit. In fact, companies have used the fuzziness in obtaining consent of a customer to offer multiple products. That should be avoided, and this is something that will go in the direction, this law, and under the rules of the law, it will come out very clearly.
Right.
So either you do it in compliance of a law or you do it suo moto. That's the difference. The intent is the difference. You want to maximize your efficiencies or your productivity or your profits by doing little work or little inputs. Again, it's very easy to set right things at the product level and make it more efficient for everybody. Or you can hide it under some, if you read and agree to a consent, some 30 pages of it, you obviously don't go through each para and each line.
Right.
But then you have the trust that I'm sharing my data, I'm sharing my consent with a company or with a provider for a specific purpose, for a specific time, for a specific duration where I can always revoke that. So those are the understanding that the data principle has, and this will be more and more emphasized going forward, and it will be an iterative educational process for everybody.
Right. No, absolutely. Well said.
Just to add to what
okay,
Arun
sure.
said, two things. A is, first of all, I as an individual has to become aware.
Right.
And that is one of the important key asks given to the data protection board. And we can take example of n number of regulations. Once a formal awareness program starts at school level, at college level, and that is one of the very important tasks by the design of the act, that this is what data protection board has to do. So first is that we will educate everybody that what are your rights and what is to be done. And that awareness will push the businesses, because then they have to comply to the act in compliance to the same data protection board. So that will bring it by design. And second, how it will be done, just to add to what Arun said, that privacy by design thing will come once we start using technology. And TRAI tried it 4 or 5 years back. We have implemented that for SMS. The whole system is, if I start explaining, it will take a little long, but it is a blockchain based, common register using consent, time-based consent, event-based consent. Right. And once you have given consent, it can be used and sometimes location-based consent. So all that we are trying to build in through technology, IBM created that engine. It is still to prove itself, if I may use the word, because technology has also to come to term to what we are asking for. And it is a full cycle that consumer is aware that my consent was for buying or say renting a property. Why am I being bothered with a sale of flat offer? That awareness has to be there, that so that I actually start complaining that my data is misused. And it's a cycle which will work. But I am sure that technology like blockchain registers will help us create those sets where even the data principal or businesses know that this is the consent and this is my limit of uses of this data.
Just want to add a point to what Mr. Bhardwaj just talked about. One of the key principles in the Act itself is the purpose limitation.
Right.
It's built into the Act itself, and the data fiduciary who's collecting the data and using the data, he has to ensure what is the purpose for which he's collecting the data, and that has to go out in the notice to the data principal. So the data principal is aware that this is the purpose for which he's giving a consent. So those are things which are built into the Act itself. And the rules will have more finer details of how the notice will come in, and even the Act goes to that extent that the user can withdraw their consent.
Right.
So the data principal can go back and withdraw. So they've said that you have to have the ease of withdrawal should be the same as ease of taking a consent. So those are the kind of things which are built into the law, and I think as and when we start implementing with the rules being there, you'll be there. And one important point which Ms. Bhardwaj has raised is that the awareness level. With the data principles, yes, that has to increase. It's an onus on all of us, because we may be doing the right thing, but the data principal is not aware of his rights or his duties. Unless we make him aware, the whole thing may again come back and say that, look, we need to make a more stringent law. So
Yeah, no,
that's
and
it.
yeah, thank you for that. And absolutely, with the law also putting in some penalty on the data principals themselves, though it's a small amount, but not for everybody. It may seem like a small amount. So, how do you see, and this is for Anil again, back to you, what role will Data Protection Board be, playing in ensuring compliance and also addressing these grievances that the consumers may raise, and how will it impact businesses?
As I said, for one of the roles, Data Protection Board has the awareness, but then it has to lay down the regulations for compliance and with the data protection law, and then it has to create that basic structure where how do you take the grievances in, and how do you handle those grievances, how do you involve businesses to settle those grievances, and then what are the kind of penal rules you make, that if you do not address the grievances, what are the time based things. So this is a side of it. Towards the business, it has to ensure that businesses prepare their data handling manuals and share with them, and they make it public. Their consent is explicit, as we have repeatedly said, and the whole mechanism of data anonymization and what is the use. So that obviously on business, it will increase the compliance load to some extent, and I disagree with Shweta on we being an over-regulated regime. But that's a kind of a seesaw we keep doing. But we have to ensure that businesses act in a responsible manner, because it is the individual customer who is always, whose rights are, who is the weakest chain in the whole, who has the lowest power. So the protection board has to act for the consumer and make sure that businesses do not bypass or do not stretch the boundary of law, and my consumers are not harmed.
Absolutely. Shweta, do you want to add
Yeah,
something to
just
it?
just one more thing
Yeah.
which the law talks about is they've made it a digital mode. So
Right.
it's easier for the consumer to get to the board itself. So today, if you look at it, the consumer is running around and he doesn't know how to do it. But if we have a digital mode, it'll become much easier for him to be able to approach the board itself and air his grievances if it's not settled by the data fiduciary.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so moving on, of course, we see that there are regulated entities who already have these, grievance processes in place, which can definitely be leveraged for DPDPA as well. But then, if we look at compliance challenges, because it's kind of considered burdensome by many organizations to also start looking at, okay, now what's the regulation is asking for, and whether this is something which requires what level of effort, right, to put into place. And that's where I think some of the companies who already are on that trajectory of, complying with multiple regulations may not find it that difficult. But then again, I'll ask Shweta, what is your view in terms of the compliance challenges that you foresee when some of the new regulations come in, and specifically, affecting telecom or tech?
So I think I'd covered a bit of it in the last question that I'd answered. So as a telecom sector, I can say so that we are probably the largest generators and the largest custodians of the data in the country as well. Combined, the three telecom operators or the telecom operators, we cover the entirety of the nation. So, and as part of our license conditions, already we are expected to maintain confidentiality of the customer data. We're supposed to be a responsible custodian of the customer data. So what Data Protection Act actually does is also use the same word, data fiduciary. It does not use the word data controllers as in GDPR.
Right.
You're supposed to be a fiduciary responsible for the data user. So from a compliance standpoint, I think we are well prepared for the new law. Even after the rules come out, the compliance will not be a challenge. The problem is that the amount and the sensitivity of the data that we already hold. So because of the volume of data that we hold, there is offline data, there is online data, there is offline data that is currently being digitized, which will then be covered under the Act.
Right.
So even though the Act creates a carve out for offline data not being covered, but any offline data that is subsequently digitized is then covered under the Act. So just the volume, sensitivity of data, the kind of users that we have, and you also have to understand that telecom is a bedrock for all digital services. So anything that happens to a person's internet usage or to its telecom services will have a ripple effect on all the other services that he uses, whether it's e-commerce or your entertainment streaming websites or anything else. So if your telecom services are down, essentially all your other digital services which are covered under the Act, they also go down. Coming on to the specific provisions of the Act, like I said, that there is no the only thing that we seek from the government probably is harmonization, because we already have certain sectoral laws in place, similar to other regulated sectors, say banking or insurance. There needs to be harmonization with respect to data deletion, cross-border data flows, data localization, because at this point of time, there is certain discrepancy which is there in the Data Protection Act as well as our sectoral laws. So that's our limited submission. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And then, so Arun, this is a question for you. Now that we are looking at what are the various, how companies are looking at these, harmonizing these regulations, what are the learnings that can be drawn from international regs that are already out there? And what should it be that India can also further start to streamline? And if that's, maybe GDPR, some provisions aligned with GDPR or with CCPA in the US. So what's your perspective on that?
It's a learning curve. And that's why the DPDP, since that's become the core discussion point, there are other laws that address the same domain. The IT Act of 2000 has now for 24 years served that purpose. The DPDP is yet to be enacted. So one thing, Shweta, I wanted to clarify. You mentioned that the anonymization standards or the encryption, sorry, this was bothering me, is not codified in the law. These things are never codified in law, because to change the standard, if tomorrow some new standard comes up, you have to go to the parliament to amend that law. So these are always part of the delegated legislation under the rules. So you keep changing the rules. Sure. So this is for the audience. I'm making that clarification. That's never codified in law, but it's always mentioned in the rules, which are more prone to amendments by the administrative department and easier. Shika, back to your question, and the response would probably cover multiple dimensions of this. So there's localization, there's encryption, as Shweta's mentioning. There's the the consent mechanism. There is also since I mentioned content, there is the Ministry of INB is bringing out another law to regulate the content bit. And so we'll have in the next 4 to 5 years a lot of churn in this segment. Anything to do with data. And Shweta's right that telecom is the bedrock of all of this, and they'll have to bear any changes in this. But then there are applications built on top of that bedrock, which will need to be more conscious of it. You are providing the basic connectivity, but the services that are built on top of the connectivity are the ones that are prone to personal harm, which is what we're trying to prevent. So on localization, RBI came out with data localization way before this was even being discussed in the IT sector. That was a financial sector data. And we saw the tensions in the financial sector where companies like MasterCard, Visa had to, there was a protracted battle with RBI, and they had to stop services. And after that, they had to localize data with now certain relaxations. And increasingly going forward, I mean, Google has announced that their Gemini service will have a localized application. And this is the world over. Even in CCPA, there is a provision of data localization for sensitive personal data, which is there in GDPR, so it provides some kind of trust for the economy, for the businesses. What are the benefits of it? It's still to be seen, because true innovation comes from effective data flows and from easy use of data. But in cross-border data flows, as we've seen, if we can use our financial products and systems, if you can use your UPI to pay in another country, that's always so useful and helpful. So that's one specific example. But if you go to the US for medical treatment, and if a doctor there is able to access your medical records, I mean, how much can you carry with you? But if on the go, somebody can access your medical records from the cloud, and that will require a significant arrangement bilaterally or in a multilateral trust framework, it becomes easier for everybody. So to arrive at that level, we'll have to go through a series of steps to build that trust, that the data is not being used for harm or for national sovereignty and security as is the larger concern.
So then, in your view, do you see data localization as more of something that's stopping innovation?
It does hinder innovation, yes, and you have to always build a bypass around that restriction that comes in. So in the case that I mentioned earlier, in the financial sector, RBI had to allow some export of the data that was to be localized here. The primary data resides in India, but they have allowed, so unless I carry my data outside, how can I build a credit profile? I mean, look, imagine this. I have a credit worthiness of X amount in India today. If I were to go and start a business abroad, I have to re-establish that credit worthiness using their modeling in that particular country. But if I could carry this around as a passport, it would be so much easier for everybody. It just increases the efficiency of the economy. That has been allowed in some particular instances, but for a larger traffic, relaxations are required. So yes, it does hinder innovation, and you have to build bypasses or circumvents that become expensive in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And not just businesses. This is something that I've also experienced firsthand. When I relocated to US a couple of years ago, I didn't have a credit history and I was just unable to get even a apartment on rent or buy a car. It was so difficult. They're like, first you have to build your credit history and then maybe apply for loan. And that's where the employer then came into play. But yes, otherwise, it's so difficult to go to a new geography, settle there. If you imagine if you could carry all these scores with you, though nobody like to be tagged, but that's what the reality is coming to be in the digital, world that we live in today. Just on
But
the
Shika, I have a slightly different
Yeah.
view than what Arun has talked about. If you look at India, was a consumer of data, but today India is the largest producer of data.
Absolutely.
And India has the largest number of startups or the innovators in the world. And these innovators or these startups need this data, the Indian data, because the data is not just in, say, in English language. Now the data is multilingual. And just it is essential that we have this data localized within the country so that this data can be made available to these startups and these innovators. It's an easy access for them. Say if the data is residing in, say, US or in Europe, trying to get access to for data for a small startup or for an innovator is a challenge in itself.
Right.
So that's the reason, as an organization, we've always been in favor of the data localization. The other issue, yes, Shweta has raised, is the law enforcement is a major concern today.
Right.
If my data is residing in US, the US government can still access it without even the Indian government having a clue that this particular user's data has been accessed. So that's one of the critical things. And I'll give you I have a personal example, like you gave an example. I had a problem with a credit card. There was a transaction which was showed up in my credit card, which was in US. And when I went and asked my bank, saying that, look, how do I settle it? He says, no, you have to file an FIR. We'll raise it to the police in India. It has to go to Interpol. Then from Interpol, it will go to the US. And then only the whole transaction will come back. So these are the challenges which are there. And that's the reason we have been propagating that the data of Indian citizens should be in India. Even if, like Arun has pointed out, RBI has allowed very specific instances of data to be transferred out. Even in telecom, it is allowed for specific instances, like for the roaming customer, the data is allowed. So but the license says that I have to keep everything within India. It's only for the roaming it is allowed. So these are the kind of things which we are looking for. Let the data reside here. Yes, there could be use cases. There could be exceptions for that. And today, if you look at it, we have, I think, one of the larger number of data centers coming in where the data can be stored, and the kind of technical manpower we have to be able to handle that data is there. Which we may be talking about 10, 15 years back, yes, we were not at that level. But today we are at that level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with the whole digital penetration, the way it's happening, and now with India on its path to become Atmanirbhar and Viksit, I think there is a lot of education also that needs to be done on at multiple levels to make sure that people are aware of what data is being shared, how it is being processed, and then organizations at the same time have to also make sure that they are doing the right thing by the customer. And as Anil also highlighted that the data protection board will also be working in the favor of customers only. And that's where we see that organizations can also come together and make sure that they are taking the right decision when they are using the data on individuals. So with that, I would just like to, have maybe some final comments from each of our panelists in terms of what the future looks like for digital India when we talk about data laws.
No,
If
I
you could
mean,
just sum it up.
Let me start with Government of India kind of this because I represent government here. It is very easy to say or claim that what we are seeking in terms of compliance, that is adding to compliance burden, and these are all PR exercises done by who's who of world. We like or don't like it. While both my co-panelists said that telecom is bedrock of all the data and everything is available with them, but no, I do not agree with them. Today, the bedrock of data are Googles and Apples of the world. If you use Android or iOS, you don't know how much of your life they can track and they can manage. And it is they who will have all these problems with the compliances. While they will be happy to comply to their country of origin, when it comes to comply to Indian laws, they will always have all these problems. We are killing innovation, we are not supporting ingenuity, we are doing this. But we as Government of India has a responsibility toward our citizens, and whatever we have done, while their legal frameworks would be there, each, as Arun said, it's not the law, it's not the act, it is the subordinate rules. And it is our regulators who have come a long way. We are as pro-business, as business-friendly as any nation can be. In fact, we are much ahead of them. Uh, People, even today, we are open to, I am going to a absolutely different domain, not the data. Our Make in India guidelines are much softer than what Baba Act has done or what Europe is now trying, what China has been indirectly implementing. So, whatever we do, India will be balancing and making full safeguard for its own citizens, and that's the most important thing. And I'm sure with more and more data awareness, our citizens will also appreciate that whatever we will be doing is in their interest to protect their identity, to protect their lifestyle. That's it.
I think, Ishika, we've already covered all the key parts of the data privacy juggernaut that we have. And it's so reassuring to hear Bharadwaj sir actually talk about the government's outlook on the Data Privacy and Data Protection Act and the rules which are supposed to come out shortly. So, as a key business stakeholder in this entire ecosystem, the only thing that I can say that interesting times ahead.
Absolutely.
We are bracing ourselves for the challenge as well of doing this mammoth exercise, but it'll be fun.
If you look at it from a telco standpoint of view, yes, we are much better prepared. We have the basic, like Shweta talked about, we have the framework in place with us. And like as a telco, we've moved into the tech space also, but that bedrock is there available with us. We're utilizing that bedrock to ensure compliances. And as responsible citizens in the country, each one of us has that, I think, I would say that's a moral duty for us to ensure that the data of the individuals is secure and it is used only in the manner which the data principle wants it to be utilized. So that's something, that's an onus not only as telcos on us, on every business entity in the country. That is onus on all of us. And that's a challenge which all of us will have to address.
Right.
Because that's the only way we can ensure the privacy of the individual. Otherwise, if we fail in our duty, the privacy of the individual will be compromised. There could be harms which today we don't even, are not really able to envisage, looking at what is the way AI is going. So those are the things which we need to look at.
Two thoughts from my side. One is what Anilji mentioned, effective processing of data. We've been saying that data is the new oil for almost a decade now, but in Indian context specifically, we haven't developed the fracking mechanism to exploit that oil. Data is sitting, and especially in the government sector, government has the maximum amount of data, but it's not been processed enough to make good decisions in sectoral contexts. So we have the agri stack coming up, we have the health stack coming up, we have the education stack coming up, we even have an e-justice stack coming up. All of that will require significant processing of data, which will require data sharing principles, which will require the laws, which will emanate from the DPDP is just the starting point, but there'll be other laws, as I mentioned, the next 5 years are going to be in that. The second point, which is a more sobering thought, is the digital divide that we are going through.
Great.
We are all talking about in an environment where everybody is connected, everybody is online and has digital rights, but there's almost half of India which is not connected, which is not online, which does not understand what are we even talking about. And with the increasing rise in frauds and crimes, which need to be tackled to reassure the trust in the ecosystem, and that will be a more difficult thing to tackle. So these two will need to go hand in hand, innovation on one side and building the trust for the weak and the vulnerable. That's going to be our challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the comments, panelists. And now wrapping up the session. So the key takeaways, of course, are balancing innovation with security and privacy. And when you start your journey on complying with data protection laws, make sure that you're looking at privacy by design. And not only privacy by design, but also factor in data hygiene by default, because that's an important tenet as well. And then also make sure that you are taking a risk-based approach, otherwise you end up boiling the ocean and you will never be able to go as far. So prioritize what matters the most and then have a more of a compliance and evolving regulatory environment where everybody can thrive. So with that, thank you so much. You've all been a lovely audience, and thank you to our panelists for sharing the stage and sharing their point of views today. Thank you. And we now would like to also thank our panelists by giving a small token. So there are mementos that we have.